345. .346 for our next song, number 346.
Thank you.
Brother Joe, would you lead us in prayer at this time?
Father, Lord, we thank you for another day, especially Lord's Day, that we can assemble in your house. Thank you for the songs we're able to sing tonight, to praise you, worship you, be the messenger, give him wisdom, and be with us as listeners to be attentive. Thank you, Lord, the way you do guide us and bless and watch over us. Be watching over the remainder of the service in Jesus' name.
Number 348. Number 348. Number 349, 10,000 angels. 349. for last song, number 356. 356. I believe in the one name of Jesus. I believe still the storm Galilee. I believe that he walked on the water. I believe that he's the answer for me. Yes, I believe in the one name of Jesus. I believe that Mount Calvary. And I believe that the tomb was found empty. And I believe that he's the answer for me. I believe in the words of the Bible. How he made the Lord blind and see. I believe that the deaf ears are open. I believe he's made a difference in me. Yes, I believe in the one name of Jesus. I believe that I'm Calvary. And I believe that the tomb was found empty. I believe that he's the answer for me. I believe that he spoke to the Lazarus. And he said, I'm blind and set free. I believe that he raised up the dead. I believe that he's coming for me. Yes, I believe in the one name of Jesus. I believe he died on Mount Calvary. And I believe that the tomb was found empty. I believe that he's the answer for me. Thank you for your participation.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to see everyone here tonight, and it's good to be with other Christians and to know that as the song that we just sang about the I believe in Jesus, and that is what we do believe in, and that makes all the difference. It makes the difference in everything we do and everything we think, everything we say, and that's the way that it should be. And it affects our whole life. So it's something that is a big part of us. It's something that we should never forget, but it's a big, important part. Tonight what I'd like to talk about is what is entitled An Interworld Spectacle. And we'll look at what I'm actually meaning by that. But an interworld spectacle. Go ahead and turn in your Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 4. And verse 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 9. We'll look at two different verses as we start off here. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 9. This is talking of, or Paul is talking here through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. 1 Corinthians 4 verse 9 says, "For I think God has exhibited us apostles last of all as men condemned to death, because we have become a spectacle to the world, both to angels and men." So here he's saying that God has basically he has exhibited us, or basically shown us to those around us. It says, and then at the end, he says, because we have become a spectacle to the world, and then he says both to angels and to men. So it's men as far as people on earth, but it's also to angels. So that's why we've called this an interworld spectacle. It's more than just here on earth, but it's also more than that. It's not only physical, but it's also a spiritual there. Go ahead also and turn to Hebrews chapter 12. I'd like to look at this here. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And we know that the chapter just right before this, we call it the faith chapter. It talks about many people who died in faith. It talks about Abraham, Noah, Sarah, many others. But then here in verse 12, or chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us," and I think more so he's probably talking about the people who've already died there, but he might mean others as well. "Let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." So we know that, first of all, Paul says that God has made the apostles, and he considered himself as one of those. He said that, first of all, he's made them kind of a spectacle or kind of an exhibit, kind of to show the rest of the world, what they're doing. But then here it kind of includes us. Here the writer of Hebrews says, "Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us," so not only is it really including just the apostles, but in a way or in a sense, it's also including the rest of us. We know that the world watches us to see what we do. Other Christians do the same thing, and that can be a good thing, I guess. We should be helping each other along, so that can be a good thing there. But we also know that, and we'll look at some more verses later on, but we also know that the angels are there to help God and to do His will. And so it sounds like all of those, both angels and men, are watching us to see what we do in life. And I'll just kind of say it how it sounds like here, but have here the Greek word theatron is translated spectacle, from which our word theater comes from. And we know that in ancient times they used to have an amphitheater, or they used to have the games or whatever. They had, we know it was most of the time probably kind of like maybe a sports theater today. Most of the time the activities are in the center, and then everything surrounding it is where people are seated, normally tens of thousands of people, and everyone is there to watch and to see what is happening. And I kind of see this as a picture of actually how it is for us as Christians. It's not just something that we're playing, or it's not just something that we're acting, but it's actually real life, which should be much more serious. I know there's a big difference, but there's also similarities. If we've seen a play, we practice, and you practice and practice, and then finally the evening or the day of the play, then everyone is gathered there to watch to see what happens. And in the same way it is in our life, except it's not acting, it's actually real life. But there's others watching. I believe the angels are watching, as we see here, and there's also other verses in the Bible that kind of show that, or they're there to help God do His will, and so they kind of have to know what's going on there. But so that's what we're going to look at tonight, and to keep that in mind as we go throughout what we're talking about here, is that we're taking this idea and bringing out a few points from it. There are obviously differences, but there's also several things that I believe are similar that we should be aware of. We know that, as I did mention, all of those things they're there just to play a game or to watch something, but in our life it's actually real. As we go out every day to do whatever we do each day, then we should realize that our life is serious, that it's something that isn't just doing what we would like to do, but it's something that Jesus has paid for our sins, and so He desires us to live for Him each day. It's not just us to do our own thing and think that, well, it doesn't matter because it's just for me. No, actually, both men and angels are watching, not to mention God and Jesus as well, which would be much more important. But there's many watching to see what we would do. And each of us is part of it. It's not just sometimes it's easy to think, well, what I do isn't really that important, but it actually is. Otherwise, why would God have created you? God doesn't make any mistakes. He doesn't just at the last moment say, well, I'll go ahead and fit you into my plan, but I didn't really have a plan for you beforehand. There's no such thing. God has already planned to have you as part of His creation even before the world began, and He doesn't just fill someone in at the last moment, but He's done that all the way even before the beginning. And this is definitely not part of my notes here or anything, but this is something that I have thought of, and I kind of thought of it, and then later on I saw it written somewhere, so others have probably mentioned it too, but even just in the past 50 years or however, think of how many babies have been aborted, and think of maybe perhaps all the things that if those children would have been allowed to live, of perhaps all the great things that they could have done. Who knows, maybe one of them would have been able to find a cure for cancer, or they could have done many other things. I know that's just kind of the way it is, but I have thought of that often. What if God would have planned for that person to do that, and humans take things into their own hands and just decide to go ahead and abort the baby, and think of how many lives that it would have affected. Think of the many lives that medical advances have saved by someone being able to do that, but think of how many could have been helped maybe if that would have been the case, but we don't really know. So the first thing that I'd like to look at, there's several things I'd like to look at, and the first thing, or I guess our proposition that I would like to look at is how then should we conduct ourselves in this world, or in this exhibit that we're showing. We know it's not just it's just so that people can watch us, but I'm just using that as an example, just so that we know that we are being watched. It's not just to do our own thing, but it is to do what we're sent for. If someone sends you to go do something, isn't it? It would seem kind of odd if we would go there and do everything else except what we were actually there to do. But that's actually the case if we don't believe in Jesus, as the song that we just sang. If we don't believe in Jesus and we don't do what Jesus wants us to do, we're actually here in this life doing everything except what we're actually here to do. And that's kind of a different example, but that's actually the case. So, I know that actually happened to me one time, quite a few years ago. Shonda sent me to Walmart to get something, and I thought, well, while I was there anyway, I might as well go get a few other items. And once I got those items and came back home, and then I thought everything was good until she asked me where that item was she sent me to get, and then I realized I forgot it. But you know, that's kind of a small good thing to forget. But you know, think of how we would feel if we would actually get to heaven, and God would ask us, well, what did you get, or did you do what I sent you to do? So, you know, that's something to think about. You know, it's as easy it is to forget what we're here to do in this life. You know, just going to Walmart to get something. What about actually what our total life is about? So how then should we conduct ourselves in this life, or in this exhibit? The first thing is that we should remember that our conduct concerns heaven and earth. We should remember that our conduct concerns heaven and earth. Our influence is affecting someone, probably many. And we're going to look at a couple of verses here. Go ahead and turn to Romans chapter 14, verse 7. Romans verse 14:7 says, "For not one of us lives for himself, and not one dies for himself." You know, sometimes we think that what I do it just affects me, but if you really think about it, how many things really only affect you? Nothing really. I mean, maybe there's something that seems like, well, it's really just me. And, you know, even without looking at what I've mentioned tonight, normally there's many other people that it affects, regardless of, you know, even what I've mentioned about others and angels watching. You know, normally affects others in our family. It affects, you know, friends, neighbors, or other things. But most of all, we know that it also, you know, God is also involved there. Go ahead and turn to 2 Corinthians 5, verse 15. And we actually looked at actually both of these verses. I'll just go ahead and read those. I believe we looked at them this morning there in Brother Bill's message. 2 Corinthians 5, we'll actually do verse 14 and 15 since they kind of go together. It says, "For the love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died. And he died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf." And I believe Bill's translation there said, "For the love of Christ compels us." The New American Standard says controls us. But basically it's meaning that, you know, we're willingly doing that. Because we love him, because of his love, we just really can't help it. Go ahead. Yeah.
I think one of the paraphrases actually puts it in a kind of interesting way. It says, "Leaves us no choice."
Okay, sure.
The love of
Sure.
Christ leaves us no choice than to serve him.
Sure. That's true. Very good. All right, thank you. And, you know, sometimes I believe something that we might use in everyday language might be, you know, we just can't help it, or we can't help ourselves, you know, and that's in a good way. We love him so much that we just can't help but do that. And, you know, if that's the case, isn't that why Jesus said that, you know, his commandments aren't burdensome? And I believe that's wise, because if we love him like we truly should and love others the way we truly should, then his burden or his commandments aren't burdensome. If you really love something, you'll be glad to do it. And I know I've mentioned this before, but this you know, brings out the point very good. Quite a few years ago, one of my cousins, he really likes to hunt. You know, whenever anyone thinks of him, they always think of him hunting. But he was out to go deer hunting and was walking across a little bit of ice across the creek, and the ice broke and he fell in. I don't know, have no idea how much, but it was at least quite a bit. I would have definitely gone back home, but he likes to hunt so much, he just went ahead and went to his deer stand and hunted for several hours and went back home. So that's a sign that someone really likes to hunt. So I don't know how cold it was, but it must have been pretty cold to have ice on a creek. But if you really love to do something, then you just kind of do whatever it takes because it's worth it, because you really like to do it. But there it says, "For the love of Christ controls us, having concluded this, that one died for all, therefore all died. And he died for all, so that they who live might no longer live for themselves, but for him who died and rose again on their behalf." So once, sometimes something happens in our life that someone does something, or something happens that changes the rest of our life. I'm sure that for each of us, somewhere along the line, that will happen maybe even more than once, probably numerous times or numerous things, that something will change our life for the rest of our life. And we're never the same again, whether it's good or bad. But this is really what it's saying here, is that Christ has changed our life so that, I'm just kind of paraphrasing here, that he's changed our life so much that the rest of our life we're going to live for him. And that's how our conduct should be in this life, is that we should do the will of Christ and do the will of the Father because of his love for us. And to realize that it's not just for ourselves. If you look at how Jesus lived his life, how much of his life did he live for himself? I'm sure that we don't really know a lot of the things that he did, but we see enough that it seems like his concern and his focus was really on you and I. It was the people that he was around there. Go ahead.
I guess the closest you could come to saying Jesus did something for himself is he threw himself to go pray to the Father, so
Sure.
have some alone time. That's
Yeah.
selfish, I guess, is Jesus God, but it's still, I'm not
Sure.
implying he's selfish, but it says that he
Yeah.
threw himself, to pray to the Father, so
Sure.
that's pretty marvelous when you think about it, look at his life,
Yep. All right. Excellent. Yeah, that's a very good point. Many times we like to get away from it all for ourselves, but Jesus was wanting to get away from it all so he could focus on what he was actually here to do. And so that's tremendous. But yeah, I easily think hobbies are perfectly fine, and I think it's great to be involved in things that keep us busy. But if you really think about it, Jesus spent his life focusing on what really mattered, and I think that's the best example that you and I could have. If we can make something a hobby or something that we're involved in, not just a hobby, but just something that we're involved in that we can enjoy or learn to enjoy, isn't that so much better? It's great to have something, to have a hobby or something to do, but whatever we do, I think it's great if we can make it to where it's focused, to where spiritual things have something to do with it. I realize that I believe everything's kind of mixed together. I don't really think there's just something that's, we can really say, well, this is spiritual and this really isn't, because I think that's all part of our life, and so it's really part of who we are. So in a sense, everything's kind of spiritual, because that's really who we are and what we're doing. It's not just a part over here and part over there. We should, or each of us, if you've ever seen a rope, there's many strands of string, or many strands in there. Each of us is kind of like that, because we either strengthen the cause of Christ or we weaken it by our actions. A rope isn't just totally. It's not just one thing. It's a lot of different things. And sure, yeah, that would be a good example. A hemp rope. All right. But, whatever we're doing either strengthens the cause of Christ or it weakens it. When someone sees something in our life that they know isn't the proper way to do it, in other words, or I guess for another example, let's say that we're thinking about buying something from a company, and you see someone that you know full well that they're lying to you about the product. Would we go ahead and buy that, or would we think about maybe going somewhere else? Probably somewhere else, because we realize that there's something there that's not quite the way that it should be. And if we're trying to proclaim Christ to others, and there's something in our life that is obviously not the way that it should be, then it weakens that cause, even though, maybe even as the example of the company, maybe even though they had a good product, just because we saw a flaw in the character, in the salesman that was presenting it to us, maybe they did have a great product, but because of him, we weren't interested in it. And it can be the same way for us. Even though Christ is everything that we could ever want or need, because someone sees something in us, it doesn't mean that we're going to be perfect, but it does mean that others will notice what's going on in our life, and we are an example to others. Angels as well as men are interested in how we live. Even the Bible says that we can make angels rejoice, or maybe even possibly weep, but it does say that they can rejoice. So look at Luke 15, verse 10. Luke 15, verse 10. And we've all heard this verse many times. Luke 15, verse 10, and this is just right after he's talked about the man who has 100 sheep and he loses one, and then he finds one and rejoices because he finds it. And then it's talking about the woman with with the 10 silver coins. She loses one coin, and she doesn't, or she searches until she finds it, and then she rejoices. And then in verse 10, basically is comparing the man finding the lost sheep and the woman finding the lost coin to this here. Luke 15, verse 10, it says, "In the same way I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." So we know there that it says the angels are rejoicing, or there is joy in the presence of the angels over one sinner who repents. And I believe that that is obviously initially, but what about maybe when someone is kind of starting to drift away from God and corrects his or her path? Why would they not rejoice then if they're actually, almost deciding to give up on God, but then decide to go ahead with it, or maybe they pushed God out of the way and then came back? I believe the angels would be rejoicing as well then. It doesn't say that, it just says over one sinner who repents. It doesn't say when, and so I believe it could be whenever they would do that. The angels would be rejoicing because they can, and we're going to look at this a little bit further down the road as mentioned earlier, but angels are there to help God. And so if you're sent on a mission, or you're there to do what someone wants, isn't that your purpose, or you're happy when things are working out according to the agenda, I guess. And so that's why the angels are rejoicing, is because that's what they've been created for, and so they're happy to do that. The angels are interested because they are offsprings of the same God. We know that angels and men are different, but they're still from the same God. The same God created us, both men and angels. They participate in the same nature and are ruled by the same moral government. And go ahead and we'll look at this real quick. Jude verse 6 there. Jude verse 6. It says, "And angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day." So God created both men and angels, and them as well as us are both responsible for our actions, and we're both ruled by the same government, which is God. And so the second thing we want to look at tonight is that we should do our part well to please God. We should do our part well to please God. If you have a play and everyone is practicing, and then when the curtain goes up or the curtain opens, and then we could say that, that's when everything is going to take place. And that should be our life each day. However we wanted to think of that, we could classify the practicing as, reading our Bible or praying, or however we wanted to do it. That's actually part of the real thing too. But we're just using this as an example. And so if we're ready every day to actually live out what God has wanted for us, it is similar to a play or something, because we're there to do what we've practiced to do. And once again, I know a play is just acting, and our life isn't acting, but there's still similarities. The actor goes all out to do the best that they can, because they know that it's not, a play is obviously just for a short time, and our life is really just for a short time. Our life is not forever. A play doesn't last forever, and our life doesn't last forever either. So both of them are, obviously there's a big difference there, but both of them are just a short span, and there's more to it, especially in our life. There's much more to it, and an actor will put forth their best effort because they know that that's what they've practiced for. Does it make any sense why an actor would practice really hard, and then the day of the play they would just kind of not put forth much effort? But sadly, sometimes that's how we as Christians are, is that we know that's what we're here to do. We know that now is the time to do it, but for some reason we think that, well, we really don't have to put forth our best effort. But isn't that really the same thing? I believe it is. We should be putting forth our best effort because that's what we've been practicing for. That's what we're here to do. We are playing before a large audience composed of people from every walk of life, and they all know what is expected of one who professes to be a Christian. Even just people in general, most of them will, I'm talking about people that aren't Christians or whatever, most of them will easily know what a Christian should do. And we're not going to take the time to look at them, but I'll just point them out. People know that Christians should be humble acting people. We read that in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 3. They know that we should be hungering and thirsting for righteousness, which is also found there. They observe whether we're faithful in church attendance, where righteousness is dispensed and put into practice, Matthew 5, verse 6. In other words, if someone knows that we normally go to church, or someone knows that we are a Christian and we're just doing other things, and they can see us outside doing other things during church service time, do you think they would notice that, or do you think they would not think of it at all? Normally they would notice it because they know that there's something different than what we claim to do. They are critics of our actions, sometimes where mercy is involved. The Bible talks about being merciful, and so they'll watch to see whether that's actually who we are. They listen to our talk, knowing that out of the heart the mouth speaks, and they see whether it is pure. Matthew 5:8 talks about the pure in heart. If we are presenting Christ by way of faction or causing a stir everywhere we go, they might know that as well. And Matthew 5 verse 9 talks about blessed are the peacemakers. And so if everywhere we go we're always just trying to cause trouble, that's kind of obvious that we're not really doing what Jesus said to do. They watch to see if we stand up under fire from the persecutor or whether we look for a milder climate when the heat is on. In other words, if we say we're a Christian and then all of a sudden we're persecuted one way or another, or someone makes fun of us and then we just decide to go somewhere else or do something else, they might see that, well, we just kind of say we are, but we're not really living that out. So that was part of, we should do our part well to please God. And we have a little bit here yet tonight. We should remember that we are on stage and that there is no place to hide. We know that we can't hide from God or His angels. There's no way that we can hide. We know that Jonah tried to run away, or I guess we could say he tried to hide, but he tried to run away. But how do you run away from someone who is always aware of where you are? And that's what God is. 1 Samuel 16 verse 7, we're not going to look there, but talks about man looks at the outward part, but God looks at the heart. And for us, we can't read other people's hearts, so we don't really know what they're thinking or what they have in their heart, but we can see their actions. So that's kind of really the only way that we can judge, but that's not always correct. We do need to judge correctly in the way that God tells us to. We need to discern things, but the simple fact is that those aren't always going to be right. We do need to do that, but we need to do it in the correct way. But even then, we will make mistakes, and they will not always be correct because we can't read other people's hearts and minds. But God can, and so there's no way to hide from God. God is, let's say that someone is doing something, and they think they're, whatever it could be anything, and then all of a sudden they realize that someone is watching them, and all of a sudden they think, well, if I would have known someone was watching me, I would have done it differently. But isn't God watching us all the time? He is watching us all the time. And so, if we're truly living for God, we should be living consistently because we know that God is watching us. And the last thing the last point that we want to look at is that we can be sure God will not desert us on the stage, but stands always ready to coach us when we falter. Go ahead and turn to 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13. It says, "No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it." So here is a great promise, is saying that no temptation has overtaken you, but that is common to basically everyone else, or it's common to man. And then he says that he will not allow us to be tempted beyond what we are able. And so that's a tremendous promise there. Sometimes we think that, we just have too much, we just can't handle it. But as far as the spiritual aspect of it, God says that he will not allow us to have to endure more. He'll not allow us to be tempted beyond what we are able, and that he will also allow the way of escape. Go ahead and turn also over, or actually I guess the first thing here in this point we want to look at is that God has ministering spirits that he uses to assist us. This is pretty tremendous here. Looking at this, I know we already know this, and I think it's been brought out probably many times, but this is a very good promise. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 6. Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 6. And here it says, and when he again brings the firstborn into the world, he says, and let all the angels of God worship him. And of the angels, he says, who makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. So there he's talking about the angels being ministers or someone that is aiding him, or he's created them to help them do what he needs to do. And then go ahead and jump over to verse 14 of the same chapter there. And it says, are they not all ministering spirits? And he's talking about the angels here. Are they not all ministering spirits sent out to render service? And look at what it says there at the last part. Isn't this a tremendous promise? For the sake of those who will inherit salvation. I believe that's a tremendous promise. It isn't that I didn't know that, but when I read this, or when I read this, it seems tremendous that God, it seems that he, has sent or sends the angels out, or it says, are they not all ministering spirits sent out to render service for the sake of those who inherit salvation? God sends his angels out to render service for you, is what it's saying. For you and I, for the sake of those who will inherit salvation. Who would you rather have on your side? The world and everything that goes with it, or just something that is made up and isn't true? It's not factual. It can't help you at all. Or would you prefer the angels to be on your side to help you out? I believe that we would much rather prefer this, and that's why I believe it's a tremendous promise. That's why we can have hope in this life, because we're not alone. We make many mistakes, but the good thing is that if we realize the great promises that God has made to us, it will give us great courage. It will encourage us, and it will help us that, regardless of how many mistakes I do make today, I'm going to correct them to the best of my knowledge, to repent of those things, and to make sure that, as we read earlier, that the love of Christ compels us or controls us. Even despite us making many mistakes, God does love us. He doesn't want us to have sin in our life, and he wants us to get those things out of our life, and he wants us to have the love controlling us that we just really can't help it but to live for him each day. And that's what I wanted to bring to our attention tonight, is that others are watching us. Angels I believe are watching us. God and Jesus are obviously watching us, but that everything we do does affect everyone around us, and our friends, family, our children. Just think about Noah. Wonder if Noah, I'm sure that he didn't really realize, when he was living his life every day before God came to him and told him to build the ark. Why did God choose Noah? Because of what he was doing. If Noah would have just lived like everyone else, I believe Noah would have drowned just like everyone else. But because of his life, God saw it and he was pleased, and because of that, each of us has benefited because of it. And so it affected many people. So I just wanted to have this message tonight to encourage each one of us and help us to never give up, but to be encouraged that God will, be on our side. The angels are there to help us, and just want to encourage us to live the life that we should live. I do have a song picked out in the Faith and Praise songbook. I believe it's number 410. I didn't write it down, but I think number 410 is Where He Leads I'll Follow, if I have it right. Oh, okay, yeah, He leadeth me. It's actually the one I meant, but I said it wrong. So, yeah. All right, thank you. Let's go ahead and be standing at this time, number 410, He Leadeth Me. And I'd like to read or to sing verses 1 and 3. Number 410, He Leadeth Me, verses 1 and 3. Okay, thank you for your good attention, and thank you, Courtney. Is there anything that would need to be mentioned or announced or anything before we close tonight? Go ahead, Travis.
There's a guy at work, his name's Derek, and we talked this week about the Bible some. I'm trying to instill really more of a faith in the Bible with him, really, because he doesn't believe that the Bible is necessarily true or from God. Anyway, it's kind of a... But anyway, and Bill brought a couple DVDs to me tonight I'm going to take to him, and he kind of lives far away from here, but hopefully I'd like to ask a prayer for him that maybe he'll watch these and God would work in his life in whatever way he sees fit. So.
All right, and that's a co-worker of Travis's, and you said his name is Derek. All right, let's be praying for Derek and Travis there as he talks to him about Jesus. Okay, is there, go ahead, Aaron.
His name's Katie. Her blood pressure will stay down. The baby's okay.
All right, definitely be praying for Katie and the baby and her blood pressure there, and just pray for a safe delivery whenever the baby comes. So. Okay, anything else? Go ahead.
I think everybody knows how I feel about the families teaching their children. You know what? When you get Brother Bill and Sister Sandy, when you really get acquainted with them and you get them in your home, they need encouragement to do the same as we do. And I thank God that there are people that's willing to work with us if we'll just listen and help.
Sure. All right. Let's be praying for Bill and Sandy. It's we'll mention, so thank you for that. Yeah, definitely being involved in any type of leadership or whatever it is. It's easy to, if you're, depends on which angle you look at it from. It seems like, everyone else has it easy except you, but it's kind of the opposite. So it's not easy to be in charge of something. All right. Anyone else? Okay. If nothing else, Travis, would you like to dismiss in a word of prayer?
Father in heaven, Lord, I thank you for the opportunity that you've given us to be here tonight, and the privilege and the freedom that we have to worship together. And Lord, I just pray that you would be with the different ones in this country or abroad, Lord, that are facing persecution and do not have the freedoms that we have here to worship you and even preach your word. Lord, I do thank you for this message that was brought out tonight. Help us, Lord, to be mindful of your word, your instruction to us, Lord, that we would realize that there are people that are looking to us as maybe the only Bible they'll ever read, the only faith that they'll ever see, Lord, that we would be a good example, Lord, that we good influence. Lord, that you would just lead us and guide us, and Lord, that we would look to you for leadership and guidance, and give you strength and wisdom, Lord, and go throughout each and every day. Father, help us to make the decisions that we need to make that would please you, that would benefit your kingdom. Just pray, Lord, that you would be with different needs, Lord, that we mentioned here. Katie and Trent, and baby, as time draws closer, Lord, with Katie's health, the baby's health, and all to go well there, Lord. It's great that you're leading and guiding them in their lives. Lord, I pray that you bless each one as we leave here tonight. Just continue to look to you, and that we allow you to lead us and guide us in our lives. In Jesus' name I pray.